My name's Trish Roberts, and this is Dede River.
Hi.
And we were going to talk about the Elon Musk and his plan to go to Mars, and he was talking just yesterday about his plans to go to Mars and rocket building and what he was going to set up on Mars. And so Dede and I thought we would talk a bit about that, and also about the Biosphere, which was something that occurred in the 80s, and Dede knows a bit about that. Was
early
it?
90s?
Early
basically.
90s?
Yeah.
So, Dede, tell us, what was your impressions about the plans of Elon Musk to go to Mars?
Look, I think there's a couple of different things. I think that it is a fabulous idea for humans to want to go into space. I think going for exploration of the universe is much better way to, develop technology, to create challenges which you have to meet, which create advances and all that sort of stuff, than war is. The initial space race, which was started by Kennedy, was, or the Western space race, I should say. The Soviets, of course, had already put satellites up, had put people up, and all that before the U.S. really got started. But the U.S. decided that rather than have a war, which is traditionally the way technology gets developed, a space race would be a great idea for that, because you have all kinds of technical challenges. Meeting them develops new ideas and new technologies, and that spreads into the general technological base. And so that's a great thing. Also, it's really interesting, I think it's sort of been a dream ever since people realized that space was someplace you could go, to actually go there and see other planets and explore the galaxy if you possibly could. Now, of course, we're a long way to start from Star Trek or something like that. We don't have warp drive. We can't go anything like the speed of light, which means that, if we were going the speed of light, we could get to Mars in a few minutes. Going to Mars, if we go on a rocket ship with what we know today, will take about 9 months. That's if you're taking the shortest path, which happens about every 2 years. So, most of the time it would take much longer than that. There's various problems with getting there. Now, I think his idea is great. Basically, the West has pretty much abandoned space exploration. NASA hasn't done bugger all except send some probes out.
Why is that, do you think? Too busy on the military?
Basically, yeah, it's all being spent on the military.
Too busy invading countries by choice for hegemony and resources.
And upgrading their nuclear armaments so that we can destroy the planet we're on.
Yes.
Before we get to any other kind of planet.
Yes.
And wipe out the human race.
Isn't it wonderful that, I was just saying...
Before it spreads.
I was just saying to Dede how sad it is that here, people are, sort of working out how to get to another planet when, of course, two problems with that is it's so sad that we can't even look after the one we're on, and when we go to another planet, we're taking all our dysfunction with us. Aren't we, Dede?
Yeah.
That's saying, wherever you go, there you are. That's the problem with that. But it's just so sad that, here, and Elon Musk seems to be in rather a desperate sort of like he expects that he's going to have this happening by 2022, where he'll have 2 cargo ships up on the surface of Mars by 2022, and then by 2024 he'll actually have people on Mars. He's in a hurry because he knows that time is running out for the planet. That's one thing.
Basically, I think he probably can see the writing on the wall. We're liable to have eco-catastrophe by 2050. I know that there's estimates that say it will happen before that, but I've always thought 2050 seems like a reasonable date. Already we're seeing
And we'll both be
problems
dead by then. That's not why we think it's a reasonable date. But
No, well,
But
we
we'll-
might not
but Dede
be.
and
I'd be 100, but I mean,
I'll be
99.
91. If we're still healthy, yeah, I'll be 91. You'll be 100. But
Yeah.
that'll be lovely, won't it? When
Yeah.
when there's major dysfunction in the world, and you're
And you're a geriatric, needing help.
we make jokes about that. Anyway, so we'll get back to Elon Musk. So what do you think about? We were talking about how the Mars surface is quite challenging, and we'll get to the psychological issues about traveling in a spaceship, in a spaceship
With other humans. Oh my God.
with other humans for like 9 months in a confined space with 40 other humans. They expect to put 40 other humans, and it actually looks doable. I'm not knocking his plan. It actually looks doable. He's going to put in this rocket, and he went through the whole thing of how it's going to be made. That it's even reusable, and he's going to have 40 people in the payload front of it. But I mean, that's going to present some major psychological issues, just spending 9 months in a confined space with 40 other people. But anyway, let's talk about the surface of Mars, Dede, and how much fun it is on the surface of Mars.
Okay,
I'm
want to start there?
I'm sorry, I'm a little tired.
Yeah.
Excuse me for giggling all the time.
Okay, well, the surface of Mars is, first off, the light on Mars is about 40% of the light. It's further away from the sun, and they have about 40% of the light that we get here. So it's going to be kind of like a perpetual, when it's bright, it will be like a perpetual overcast day. It's cold a lot of the time. Now, I've got some figures. If you want to hold this for a minute,
But mind you, people will be inside these large domes because it's not possible for people to actually exist on the surface of Mars.
We should probably talk a little bit about what he's actually planning and that kind of stuff before we talk really about.
Yes, let's talk about what he's planning.
The surface of Mars. Let me just.
Dede's the biologist here and the synecologist, is it?
Synecologist, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the average temperature on Mars is about.
I'll hold it, Dede.
About minus 40 or something centigrade.
So wearing
it's a bit like
wearing your winter undershirt isn't going to do. Isn't going to cut it.
The average temperature is about the same as winter in the Antarctic, which is colder than in the Antarctic.
So that's a normal. Arctic. That's a normal. And summer.
That's an average thing. Summer it can actually get quite hot. It can get up to 36 degrees at different times.
Celsius.
Centigrade, yeah. I'm talking real temperature, not American temperature.
Right, yeah.
And which, is somewhere up around 100, 104 or something like that. So it can get quite hot there in the summer. But the problem really, let's go back just to the technical problem of getting there. As I say, you've only got a shot because Mars is circling the sun and Earth is circling the sun. The last thing you want to do is have to go all the way from one side of the sun's orbit to the other side of the sun's orbit. I mean, that would take ages. If you go for the shortest possible distance, when, Mars will be in the shortest distance by the time the rocket gets there. That happens about once every 2 years.
Right.
So you can't just shoot off a rocket anytime. And his idea of sending the supply rockets there first indicates he wants to do, like NASA has always had the idea of sending a rocket there with a few people. because it takes about 9 months to get there, they figure, and because you won't be able to get back on a short orbit in less than about 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll have to stay there for 4 months or so.
Right.
And then it's another 9 months back.
So no going crazy in the meantime.
So no going crazy.
Because it'll be too bad.
It's going to be about 2 years that these people are going to have to be together on this thing. And that's 2 years you're going to have to supply all the air for these people, and all the water for these people, and all the food for these people. Now, that's why NASA usually thinks in terms of 3 or 4 man teams instead of 40 people.
Right.
40 people is pretty bloody ambitious.
Yeah, it is.
And they reckon, like a big rocket, they'll be able to throw that into space and, jettison the boosters that will get it out of the Earth's orbit, out of the Earth's gravity well, and then send the final capsule, or else they'll send it from the space station. I mean, that kind of makes the most sense. You send all the things up, build your rocket in orbit, where you already don't have to pull away so much from the Earth's gravity. And anyway, you have to have enough to launch it off to Mars and have all of those supplies and everything else for a 2-year trip. And NASA usually thinks you have a very small landing module because you don't want to have enough fuel to pull a big rocket back off of Mars. You're going to orbit Mars with your rocket and then send a landing party down. And probably quite a bit of the time you might be actually up on the space, on your spacecraft, taking readings with probes and all that kind of stuff. And you might go down for an adventure on the surface for a short period of time.
Have we talked, Dede? Have we talked about the gravity, what the gravity is like, and how that affects the skeletal structure of people?
Yeah, the gravity is, I think it's about a third of the gravity. Maybe it's less than that.
And because
let's just quickly check that.
Because our bones need gravity, it needs exercise, standing on, like weight-bearing exercises to keep its integrity and to keep this, bone health. That's going to be a real problem for people, and it'll be a problem for them returning to Earth, particularly people who are born on that planet. Born on Mars with that sort of gravity.
Well, okay, we're really jumping ahead.
Yes, we're jumping ahead. Dede knows a lot more about this than I do.
The gravity is about a third of Earth. So the weight of somebody who weighed 100 kilos, which is about 220 pounds, is going to be about 36 kilos.
Oh, let me just pause for a moment and show our little friend here. Hi, Nandi.
We have cats on the...
We have feline friends on the bed.
On the bed, yes. Anyway, you're going to end up weighing about a third of what you would on Earth. So if you weigh, 150 pounds, you'd weigh about 50 pounds there.
Wow.
And that's going to affect your skeletal system. Already you have problems with people in the space stations for any length of time, with degradation of the bone system, and you have to deal with your muscular system, and all of that stuff, because with less gravity, all of that weight-bearing stuff doesn't work.
So talk about how you were saying how when they start breeding on that planet.
Okay, well, I mean, as I was saying, the NASA idea would be you send somebody up there for 3 months. Most of the time they spend orbiting around, because, otherwise you have to have a little house down on the surface of Mars, because the surface of Mars isn't a habitable place. It can vary hugely in temperature. A lot of times it's really cold. The atmosphere is about 1/100th as thick as the atmosphere here.
Talk
so
about
there's
the
no way you can breathe it. It's made of carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide mostly, isn't it? And
yeah,
argon.
and a little bit of argon, and both of those will kill you.
Yes. Yes, you wouldn't want to have a crack in the overhead.
You wouldn't want to have a crack anywhere. And anytime you went back, you'd have to be in a spacesuit and all of that sort of thing.
And we were talking about how I don't want to sort of take you away from that particular issue, Dede, but
Yeah.
we would sorry Nandi, I bumped him in the face. The psychological the psychological issues of, well, we talked briefly about how spending 9 months in a small spacecraft in a small confined area with 40 people or even 5 people can be really a problem.
Yeah.
But we also the other thing is being in these confined large warehouse sort of spaces with an atmosphere that is created, that if you don't have that atmosphere, you're going to die. If there's any cracks in the overhead sort of protective structure that keeps you separated from Martian atmosphere, living in that environment is going to be sort of rather challenging psychologically.
Yeah, I think we're jumping ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, we're jumping ahead again.
I think basically I was going through the NASA thing, and if you had a group go down there, they could create a dome or something, which would be kind of like a house or a large tent sort of affair to keep you alive while you're on the surface. I think that Musk actually has a different idea. When he's talking about putting 40 people up there instead of, an exploration team, it starts to be more like a colony.
Yeah, colony.
And he's talking about putting 2 supply rockets up there to solve this problem of you can't take all that material there and bring it back, and like the weight and all that is just too much. If you're going to try and have any kind of real base on Mars, you're going to have to send the material separately. And that's what he's planning on doing. He's talking about putting 2 rockets full of material.
Yeah,
up
he's
there.
sending that first
And sending
by
that
2022, which isn't far away.
And I'm thinking that he's thinking people will go down there and build a structure that people can live in long term. If you're starting to think about building it long term, you have to start, it's a different set of challenges than having a structure that you can stay in for a little while. If you've got a structure that you can stay in for a couple of weeks, well, that's camping out. If you're talking about staying there for months or permanently, then you have to start really dealing with how are you going to get the air? How are you going to replace the fuel? How are you going to provide energy? How are you going to do all these things? What are you doing? How are you going to do your mining if you're planning on mining for materials or trying to get materials? How are you going to extract water if you can find any water up there, or create water? Like those are big challenges. And if you're going to do that, you need, like significant infrastructure.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's what he's thinking in terms of, like, he'd actually like to,
He's talking about cities.
At very least, have some sort of mining camp up there where they can get resources. But I think really he's probably smart enough to know that our time on Earth it looks like we've limited it.
Yes.
And he's thinking, well, maybe you can have an escape place where you can go, and if we really bugger up the Earth, then there's somewhere else to go.
Yes.
In an emergency. And if you're thinking that way, then you start getting into biospheres, which is why we were talking about the Biosphere 2. The Biosphere 2 was, of course, the attempt to, on Earth, create a sustainable biological system. Biosphere 1 is, of course, the Earth itself. And to try and create an ecology which is sustainable is a really difficult challenge. And, like, I think he's thinking in terms of that. But when you're thinking in terms of that, then you start needing to have 40 people, 100 people. You need a lot of people to build this stuff, to do this research, and that kind of stuff.
So
and when you're talking about that, you're not talking about leaving them up there for 3 months or 4 months and then bringing them back. And remember that the time for a window for coming back within 9 months for only a 9 months job is about every 2 years.
Right.
So if you stay there beyond your window for returning, the next window of returning, it probably means you're going to be spending over 2 years on Earth. So that's a year
on Mars.
On Mars, excuse me. That means you're going to be going 9 months to get there, spend 2 years at least to get there on Mars, and then 9 months to get home. Now, that's way beyond what anybody's done on a space station. And we've already seen there's all kinds of medical problems for people who are on the space station.
Yeah.
Now, Mars has some gravity, which you don't get on the space station, although you can get some by rotating it. But you're going to be, you can't create artificial gravity on Mars. You're stuck with the gravity they have.
So none of this Star Trek gravity and the ships type thing. It's
there's no gravity plates. There's nothing like that.
Yeah.
You can't rotate Mars. You can rotate a space station fast enough so the centrifugal force creates artificial gravity out at the edges. You can't do that when you're on Mars.
Yeah.
You're stuck with the gravity that they've got, which is low.
Yeah.
So there's going to be all kinds of health problems. And, like, do you really want to bring people back?
Yeah, and also we haven't talked
question.
about the pathogens, etc., on Earth, and how once you've been on Mars for a while, particularly those who are born on Mars, you don't have the exposure to the pathogens that Earth has, and
now
so
that's
you
jumping
can't.
ahead.
That's jumping ahead. Sorry.
To having people born on Mars.
Yes.
I mean, we're just playing out this little fantasy of if you're thinking about starting a colony on Mars, you're going to have to, first off, you're going to have to deal with the psychological problems. I don't know how many people have been in a situation where you are stuck with a very small group of people for any length of time. I think people who are in Antarctic research stations experience that. People on submarines experience that. People on long sailing ships that go off for long periods of time. I was on a research ship, and we would be off away from shore for 6 weeks or thereabouts at a time, and then without coming into shore. When you're on a small enclosed area with a number of people, there are psychological pressures. There are things that come up. Just having to be around those people consistently, not being able to really get away, and it depends on the tensions between people.
Tell everybody about the person who didn't know how to give everybody else personal space on the ship.
Okay, on the ship, we didn't have much personal space. Our cabins were extremely small. They were about the size of a single bed with shelves. So most of the time, we were in tropical waters a lot of the time, and people slept on the deck. There were a few people who were sexually involved in each other, so people would be having sex on the deck. You are at the same time doing things like speed tests and weather tests and wind things and various things. I mean, they're mostly having sex at night when you're not seeing it. But it's like...
Not while you're trying to take...
Well, yes, while you're trying to do, because...
Not while you're trying to take wind tests, people
because you
having
might be
sex on the
doing
deck.
star shoots, celestial navigation, a 3-star fix or something like that, and somebody is having sex in a different part of the deck. And, what you need to do in that situation, is give people psychically that privacy. You just pretend they're not there. And, we often had people who went to the toilet off the front of the ship, off the bolsters. We had a place to do that because it was often more comfortable than using the heads. And
But you're not going to be
if you had diarrhea or something, pretty much everybody on the ship would know that.
Yeah.
But what happened was everybody generally everybody who was on that ship for any length of time was very good at not noticing.
Yeah.
Of being aware, but, not paying any attention, allowing that person their psychological privacy.
But that particular person who...
There was one person who came on board who seemed incapable of doing that.
Yeah.
If you came out of your cabin so you had a little bit of room and you were changing clothes, they'd sit there and stare at you.
Oh, great.
They would, be watching people all the time. And this very quickly became intolerable. Within 2 weeks, people were ready to throw the bugger overboard.
Yeah.
And we were going through the Mediterranean at that time.
Yeah.
And we decided to break our schedule and pull into Italy and throw him off the ship, basically.
And here's...
he had to leave.
And here's, Dede, here's where we get to the bit where you can't do that on a spacecraft with 40 other people. There's nowhere to pull over, and unless you want to kill that person or something, or put a bag over their head and leave them in a tiny room to,
throw them out the airlock.
Throw them out the airlock, whatever. That's not going to happen. So that poses a whole different psychological problem.
And I'll just go a little more into the psychology of people in submarines, people in Antarctic bases, people on sailing ships and stuff. You'll find if there's a group of people who spend any length of time together, there are people who are friends and people who are not necessarily don't like each other, maybe very much, people who become irritating. You might have your work that you do, but we're humans, and so work is never all that you do.
Yeah.
People develop relationships. People might decide all work and no play is no fun, and so they have every Wednesday we'll all get together and everybody will do a little talent show thing. Somebody will do something or other. And if you have somebody who consistently decides that they're funny and is going to do a comedy skit that isn't funny and maybe somewhat offensive, and they do this again and again and again, after a while, you start really disliking that person.
Mm-hmm.
And this can happen even when, every month or 6 weeks, you're going to pull into port and all be able to go off, and go to the market, go to restaurants, and get away from each other. You're still going to come back and that same person is still there. Yeah. Now, we're talking about putting 40 people in a tin can where nothing is different outside.
Yeah.
Because in spite of Star Trek and being able to see nebulas and stars rushing past.
And having your own beautiful room.
And having
massive,
your own,
beautiful
you're not going
room.
to have beautiful rooms. It's going to be bunks.
Yeah.
If it's going to be cabins, they're going to be tiny cabins.
Yeah.
They're going to be something like this research ship I was on, where they might be, as big as a single mattress wide and long, so that you can lay down in it. You may not be able to stand up in it. It may be a case of, you have your shelves under the bed and you can get out and you can dress in the hallway.
Yeah.
And that's quite a big possibility.
Yeah.
Washing and that kind of stuff. Well, it's probably going to be minimal privacy.
Yeah.
There's not going to be many places you can't go off to the library. Like, one of the things on the ship is you could go to the library and read, and there might be one or two other people there. But there were only generally 12 to 16 people on the ship.
Yeah, sorry.
Sometimes it would be as low as 7 people.
Right.
But, it was more often 12 people. And people could get on each other's nerves, and people would have relationships, and people would fall out of love. And fall out of relationships, and have all of those kind of problems. And this is in a situation where you can get off. You can decide to leave the ship, and people would at various times. And you're going to have breaks regularly. And if you are having a hard time and you're around people who can give each other that kind of psychic privacy, you can go up by the bow and sit and just watch the waves for a while. And watch the weather, watch, a cloud front coming in across in the distance, or whatever. Look at the beautiful water and see some flying fish, or something like that. Those things happen on a ship. They don't happen on a spaceship. On a spaceship, when you look out the window, it always looks the same. The stars don't move.
If you have a window.
If you have a porthole, if you have a window, the stars don't move. You always see exactly the same view.
And I don't think I'd be surprised if they have any sort of window. And once they get there too, it's like it doesn't let up then, because once you get there, then you have to go through trying to organize, it's sort of like a tremendous responsibility trying to organize.
It's tremendous pressure. It's a tremendous. I mean, think of what would you do to entertain yourself? Are they going to have a video library and have little, pods, something like this, that you can watch a movie on? Well, think of the prospect of having 9 months of Netflix. And you might have a wide selection. You've got 40 people there. How wide a selection are you going to have? How long is it going to be before you've binge watched everything that you want to watch?
You're not going to have the holodeck or anything like they have on Star Trek. You're not going to have holodecks and be able to go off. I don't know if people watch Star Trek here, but go off and have all sorts of adventures on holodecks, so that, you can get away from your situation. But Dede, I just wanted to go back to the biosphere. Tell us why the biosphere ended up folding up.
Okay, well, the biosphere, I was involved with the synergias at one point.
What were the synergias?
The synergias were a group of people who had ideas about the ecology and sustainability and that kind of thing, and had really interesting projects that were done on a shoestring, and people worked really hard on them for next to nothing because it was interesting. That group, I left it. They stopped wanting to work so much on third world development issues and alleviating poverty.
This is in the United States, isn't it? In California?
Yes. No, it It may have started, I think, in California, but it was in New Mexico.
Oh, okay. The Biosphere was in New Mexico?
No,
Biosphere 2?
Biosphere 2 was in Arizona.
Arizona.
But the Synergias started. The Synergias did various things around the world. Costa Rica, Nepal, Australia, France, England. It was associated with a group called the Institute of Ecotechnics that the Synergias also started.
And you were heavily involved in that,
And I was heavily involved with that for them for about 7 years.
Yeah.
I left because they started getting into these huge project things, and ultimately they went on to build the Biosphere 2. Biosphere 2 was an attempt to create a self-sustaining ecology. And it was a huge project. It was about 3.5 acres in Arizona that was completely enclosed. It was like a massive greenhouse.
And it was funded by a very wealthy person who was interested in that.
Yeah, a lot of the funding came from Ed Bass, a very wealthy person who had an oil fortune behind him.
Yeah.
And I mean, he was one of the madly wealthy people.
Yeah,
And
madly.
he got involved with this group, the Synergias, and that's when they started having these really big ideas.
Yeah.
And that's about the time I left.
Uh-huh.
And the
What were the problems that the actual...
they had 8 people who entered the Biosphere, and they were going to close the door. And the idea was that they would have these ecologies that could sustain the atmosphere and produce enough food for them and produce enough food for all these other animals and birds and
Yes, if we can
fish.
just stop for a second. Dede and I are both vegans, so we don't endorse. Dede wasn't a vegan then, but we don't endorse using animals for these sorts of experiments and whatever. So, you know, I reject that, and Dede rejects that. But anyway, we'll just go on. Okay.
In any case, this was an exercise in creating a biosphere, and biospheres do have animals.
I know, but can I just stop for a sec?
Yeah.
But yes, biospheres do have animals, but unfortunately, that's actually a non-consensual use of them.
Yeah.
And we don't also. They also died. A lot of those animals. So it was basically.
Well, basically, all of the vertebrate animals died.
Yeah. But what I'm trying to say is, it was an experiment whether a biosphere contains animals or not.
Yeah.
It's an experiment using animals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're not into animal experimentation, basically.
No.
But this experiment caught the interest of scientists all over the world. NASA, NOAA, the USGS, the Academy of Sciences, Russian academies, French academies, people from all over the world were interested in this as a project, and a lot of scientific knowledge went into creating this. People from the Royal Botanical Society and all that kind of stuff. The idea was that, as I say, that it would create a thing which was self-sustaining. And so they enclosed 8 people into this for 2 years. Basically, they were growing their own food on a small plot of that space.
It was only a few acres, wasn't it? 3 acres?
The whole thing was 3 acres.
Yeah.
I think the plot where they were supposed to grow their food was 2,500 square meters.
Right.
So it was significantly smaller. It was a very small part of this entire biosphere.
And they had a sort of an ocean type area, and they had
an
a
ocean
desert
type area and a desert
type area,
and a fog ecology and kind of a mountain.
It even had rain at one point. It
was supposed to have rain.
It did have rain, though, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. Mm. There were problems with some of that. Mm-hmm. A lot of things didn't work out. The concrete interacted with the atmosphere and removed oxygen and carbon dioxide from the air. At some point, the oxygen level inside the thing dropped to the equivalent of being 4 kilometers on a mountain 4 kilometers high.
Right.
So it was getting very thin.
Yeah.
They had to bring in scrubbers and inject some oxygen.
There was outgassing from the cement, wasn't there, too?
Actually, yeah, it was the interaction of the cement with the carbon dioxide and the oxygen created carbonates, which took the oxygen and the CO2 out of the air.
And let's just say that There was NASA involved, there was NOAA involved eventually, there was lots of scientists, so it wasn't just some amateurs trying to create.
No, this was an international science project.
Yeah.
This is probably one of the biggest projects of its kind that's ever been done, and it had internationally reputed experts from all over the world who were very interested in this and wanted it to succeed.
Yeah.
Now, I'll say as a scientist myself that when people say it failed in some way, in science, if you do an experiment, there's no such thing as failure. If something doesn't work out the way you'd hoped it to, or you'd expected it to, or you'd wanted it to, that tells you something. It's like they weren't expecting this interaction of the atmosphere with the concrete, and they learned a lot about that.
Yeah.
They learned that, like basically all of the vertebrate species in the biosphere died.
Yeah.
Most of the insect species died.
Yeah.
There was a species of ant that flourished. It took over everything.
Yeah.
There was a species, cockroaches did really, really well.
Yeah.
There was a huge population of cockroaches.
Right. So basically, it was a really fragile environment. That's what they discovered. It was a really
fragile environment, and it didn't work.
Yeah, and it didn't work.
They weren't able to create anything like a sustainable.
Now, if we can just
stop. Now, this is on Earth.
Yeah, that's right. I was going to say, if we stop here just for a moment and just remember that this is on Earth, so they didn't have all the challenges of being on another planet with an atmosphere that is hostile, that they have to actually, like if there was a hole in the biosphere that allowed the atmosphere to come in, well, it's okay because it was actually a good, atmosphere. But I mean, they couldn't even manage to have a sustainable environment on Earth with the help of all those NASA scientists and NOAA, etc. And this is what makes me wonder it's obvious that Elon Musk is in such a hurry. I was thinking, it would make sense that you would want to be able to create an environment that's sustainable first on Earth before you go trying to do it on another planet that has a hostile environment. I find that very odd, don't you, Dede? And also of concern.
Well, I think there's been fantasies that you can do this for a long time, and there's always the hope that human ingenuity, if you put scientists, there's been movie after movie after movie that have shown people doing this.
Yeah.
There's, you put
American
the scientists out there and they will find a way.
Yes.
Because
get some plucky scientists and it'll work.
Get some beautiful women scientists and some rugged, manly scientists. And even if there's an evil android trying to get you.
Yes, get some beautiful scientists.
You'll get through it.
Some stereotypically beautiful scientists that all they have to do is put glasses on and we believe they're scientists.
Yeah. The Martian, for example, he manages to do all kinds of fabulous things.
The Martian?
There's a movie called The Martian about somebody who got stranded up there. One person.
Matt Damon.
And he was what's the name of that guy that, MacGyver. He was the MacGyver of space, and he managed to rig all these things and make it work and survive.
Just one person.
One person. Anyway, the other thing that happened in the biosphere that's worth noting is that very quickly the 8 people split up into 2 groups of 4 people who disliked each other.
And then it became Lord of the Flies.
And it became, they all had to survive and they were being watched from outside. But you ended up with 2 opposed groups. Wow. And this is with 8 people.
Yeah.
Now you imagine putting 40 people up there.
Yeah.
And
they
having
can't
them
get
in
out.
an enclosed space where they cannot get out.
Yeah.
And they're not in communication. They don't have Facebook. They don't, like people in the South Pole and stuff like that used to get onto ham radios and stuff like that, or now they can get onto Facebook and they can do internet things. People on Mars are not going to be able to do that. you'll every so often be able to get some communication with a big time delay, and it's just not going to be that.
But
You're going to be stuck with those 40 people.
Yeah.
With whatever, and I mean, if you're picking people for people who get on, like, well, are you going to sacrifice expertise in whatever area you're doing, or are you going to try and find your experts and then try and find the experts that get on best?
Yeah.
I'll tell you, that's not going to work very well. There's going to be people who fall in love, fall out of love, who get jealous, who are, other people can't stand, who, and there's going to be cliques formed, and people with different ideas and opposed ideas, both about society and about the way they're living, and they just don't like each other's face, and,
And the reason
you're dealing with people.
Yeah, the reason we're bringing this up is because this is something that Elon Musk doesn't really sort of address at all in his presentation. It all sounds very good, and it might be possible technologically to get there and everything, but I think the psychological factors are going to be really, really something that's going to affect everything. And also, like we say, Biosphere didn't really work on Earth, and he's sort of talking about creating a biosphere really basically on Mars, something that really can't fail. If it fails, everybody dies. Nobody can rescue them.
He's going to have to be talking about something like that, because there's no other way to really survive unless you're just going to keep sending supply rockets one after the other, after the other, after the other, and try and supply everything everybody needs all
That's
the
right.
time.
And also, it has to be 100% success every time you send a supply rocket. It has to, land there successfully, and, everything has to be functioning. There's, and of course, it doesn't work like that in real life, that everything functions all the time. That everything,
If you have a meteorite that goes through the dome or something like that,
you're finished.
Well, hopefully you've got an alarm system that's immediately going to do it, and everybody's going to slap masks on and go up there and seal the breach.
Yeah.
But it's really difficult to do something like that. Even the Biosphere, where they were trying to make it virtually airtight, it was virtually airtight. It wasn't air.
Sorry, we got cut off just momentarily. We were just saying how it has to be it has to be sort of airtight. The actual the Mars here. You explain it, Dede.
Okay. Basically it would have to be airtight, or else you have to have something to continually replace the air that you're going to lose. If you have an emergency and you lose air, that air has to be replaced. You can't bring it in from outside, because the atmosphere is 1/100th as thick, and it's made of carbon dioxide. And
when you say 1/100th as thick, what does that mean, Dede?
That means that there's just not as much air. It's thin. It's
like thin, like if you're up a 4-mile high mountain, or thinner than that?
Much thinner than that.
So you'd have to be
like you're in the ionosphere.
Oh, okay. Yes,
like you couldn't breathe.
Yeah.
Even if it was the right proportions, at that thickness, it's like you couldn't breathe it.
Yeah. And there's so much carbon dioxide. And then this is the other thing
it's virtually all carbon dioxide.
He was talking about, Elon Musk was talking about how they were going to eventually, is it terraform it, sort of.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah, I wanna. Here you go.
No, I don't. I'm not interested in being on the camera right now.
Okay.
Terraform it. Like, for example, we were talking about what kind of plants. For example, they have dry ice storms, don't they, up there?
Yeah, basically when it snows there, it does snow from time to time. And when it snows dry ice.
Ouch.
It's basically frozen carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
And
So
yeah,
how are you going to find plants that can adjust to, first of all, I mean, there's plenty of carbon dioxide, so they probably like that. But then you've got you've got a low light. You've also got wind, sort of snow. You got wind on there, and snowstorms that are dry ice, and
dust storms.
And dust storms. So how
You've
that
got
they
massive dust storms.
Yeah,
that
they have
will
big
last
dust storms
for weeks or sometimes months.
Right, and they cover everything with that fine red dust.
Yeah, and they will cut out a lot more light.
And that's the other thing. What happens,
solar
Dede?
collectors and
Dede?
stuff are not going to work nearly as well.
No, I was going to say, what happens when you'd have to have a way of being able to clear the red dust off those big off your dome.
Yeah, you'd have to do that.
Do they have rain? Do they have rain up there?
No.
There's no rain.
There's no rain. There's 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 dry ice, snow sometimes. You know, they're hoping to be able to find water somewhere, maybe underground, or produce water chemically.
Through the vaporization. Vapor, I mean.
If you've already got CO2.
Yeah.
And that means you've got some oxygen and you've got carbon. If you can split the carbon away from the oxygen, then and add hydrogen. You know, you're going to have to find a source of hydrogen, you know, to add to it, and you might be able to create water. But if you're talking about those kind of processes, you're talking about trying to do it probably within your dome.
Yeah.
You know, terraforming is when you try and do it on a planetary scale.
Right.
But you're not going to be doing that on a planetary scale.
No.
Not for a long, long time.
Really? Creating water, you mean?
Well, creating water or something like that.
Right.
To try and change the atmosphere of Mars.
Oh. You know, yes, that's a bit of a fantasy, I think.
Well, I think it is possible, but it requires a huge technological input and a huge infrastructure and a whole lot of energy. And, you know, like, well, as I was saying, you know, like even if you're trying to grow plants in a dome, in what is effectively a greenhouse, well, it's going to have to be very well insulated and all that because it gets too cold outside. Right. You might even need heaters, but you'll probably need lights too. Because the amount of light for photosynthesis is low to start out with, and if you have dust storms or, you know, snow, dry ice snow on top of the thing, well, that's just going to cut out your light. Yeah. And we're talking about a place where the light is already only, you know, like a third of what it is on Earth. Yes. You know, that's when it's bright.
But the radiation is really high, isn't it? You have to have, if you went outside of the dome, you have to wear radiation suits.
Yeah, you'd have more radiation,
and of course have your own oxygen supply, etc.
You know, without our ionosphere and things like that, you're going to have a higher level of cosmic radiation, UV light, and that kind of stuff. Than we would have on Earth. And so, yes, you're going to need some sort of suit to protect you from radiation. You're not going to be able to just have a mask or something like that and go outside for your breathing and go outside in, you know, shorts and a T-shirt.
And that's what poses the other problem too, is that you're always kind of stuck inside these large cities. You know, eventually if they get to build the cities, you're always inside these large cities, inside these domes, and so you really just can't jump in a car and have a change of scenery. And besides, the change of scenery isn't going to be that much of a change because Mars, well, you talk about the terrain of Mars, and there are some different areas that look different. But I mean, you just can't get in a car and take off easily. You know, they'll eventually might have transport, but you're not going to be able to that's the other psychological aspect of it. It's like if you get tired and you want to, if you're in a country where it isn't war torn, etc., you can kind of get into a vehicle and change your environment occasionally, or to get on a bike and change your environment, or go for a walk or whatever, and you can just do it. You can get up and put on a coat and out you go. But I mean, this isn't going to happen on Mars. You're never going to be able to be outside in that environment and survive. So you have to have you have to don a suit, have all that, and then get in some sort of a vehicle that can go somewhere. And so it's a sort of like, it's just going to be a very, very different kind of psychologically. And I don't know if the children born on there are going to be entirely happy with a situation like that. And they're never really going to, unless they work out a way of introducing pathogens to those children so that they can go, or that there's some way of fixing their skeletal structure, so they can actually exist on Earth with the gravity and the pathogens. They're kind of stuck there, aren't they, really?
Yeah, well, I mean, that, again, that kind of was in some of our farther reaches of this. We were talking about, like, what's the idea? If you're going to try and start a colony up there, well, eventually you are talking about children. You're talking about people getting together. You're talking about children. You're not talking about people coming back regularly. You're not talking about people going up there and coming back every 2 years, because that's a huge amount of resources to use to bring people back.
Yes.
And you going to try and want people up there. You're talking about, even if they did one rotation, one miss of the window for returning, you're talking about them being there for or being away from Earth for 4 years.
Yeah.
But probably you're talking about them moving to Mars.
Yeah.
On a more permanent basis. You're talking about, unless you're trying to do some sort of fly-in, fly-out mining camp sort of arrangement. But you're talking, but if you're producing any kind of material there to bring back, are you going to want to take the ability to bring that back and replace it with the food, air, and everything else for a person? You're talking about a big investment. And if you have people who are there for any length of time and decide to get together and have children or something like that, it's what we're talking about psychologically before. If you have people there, what would it be like? Well, if you built a big, massive dome complex or something like that, most of that's going to be really functional. Most of it's going to be some sort of big power plant to sort of convert some sort of energy, material or something into energy, or collect sunlight or something or other. And you're going to need a hell of a lot of energy for producing water, for producing warmth, for building, for producing light for the plants. I mean, you're going to need everything you do. Yeah. Everything you do is going to need an external source of energy. Yeah. And so energy production is going to be huge. Yeah. If you're going to try and create any kind of assisted creation of atmosphere through use of plants, well, you're going to have massive greenhouses. And if you want to try and feed people at all, you're going to have massive greenhouse projects. There's going to be a lot of people growing food. And that's one of the things in the biosphere. I mean, the people there were using a low carbohydrate, high nutrient density diet that was the longevity diet and stuff. And they were hungry all the time. Right.
Was it Dede? Was it completely plant-based? I hope so.
No, I think they used people. Yogurt or something. Yeah. They did milk goats,
What about fish? Did they eat fish?
Well, I think the plan was that, but I think the fish all died in clogged the filters for the ocean.
That's really, really sad.
Yeah.
It's so sad.
The insects all died.
Yes.
All the invertebrates
See,
died.
and this is the point we're trying to make. Of course, putting aside we're vegans, so we don't appreciate people non-consensually using animals, exploiting animals in any way. Okay, but the fact that they brought these individual animals in, these species in, and a lot of them died.
We really don't know what we're doing.
Yeah, don't know what we're doing.
Yeah.
But and this is the other thing also that I mentioned to Dede, that we don't realize how sharing a planet, as much as we see other animals as resources and as property, because we're not a vegan planet, and I hope, Dede and I, of course, hope that there will be a vegan planet before we drive ourselves to complete extinction, which looks like it's on the cards, but would be nice to see a vegan planet before that happens. But we don't realize as a species how important other animals are to us, just in knowing that they're here on the planet. As much as we like to think that we own all these animals and their property and that they're ours, they're not, okay? That's just our speciesist indoctrination. But as much as we like to think that, they're actually psychologically, it's psychologically beneficial to be sharing a planet with other species, and we won't realize how important the existence of these other species are until we get on a planet where there are no species other than our own, or not that we know of. There might be, maybe there are small a little bacteria and all that sort of thing, obviously, but there, as far as we can tell, there are no species anything like what we have here on Earth. So that's going to be another thing that people are going to have to deal with, and God, heaven forbid that they take species up there to start breeding them again. And so, of course, we still have this speciesist indoctrination. We still have this speciesism in us that there will for sure be people that will take non-human animals up there and try and breed them, etc. And of course there'll be ones that will die, and then we'll try and breed them and try and do the whole animal exploitation and eating, wearing and using animals up there. And I hope that it doesn't happen, but of course we're still speciesists, so it will happen. But I mean, it's very, very sad that I think people will realize how important all these species are, just the existence of them on the earth for us. And that's the other thing that people are going to have to deal with. Anyway, I just wanted to briefly talk about that, Dede. Anyway, so what do you, overall, what we're trying to say is that if you can't make a Biosphere 2 work on this planet with all the abilities that you have living on the planet and trying to make it work, I don't see how they're going to successfully be able to do any of this with the hostile planet that there is, the atmosphere, etc., and all the energy that it requires, and the fact that it doesn't rain, and you're going to have to produce water, and all that kind of stuff, and you're going to, you're going to have all the plants inside these. They're going to have to be a supremely protective atmosphere and all this sort of stuff. I don't know. I have a feeling that this is a really kind of desperate attempt. Elon Musk realizes the time is up for us here on the planet, and it's kind of like a desperate attempt in a way to do something. And hats off to him. It's a great idea, and I hope it's successful, but I also realize that as a species, we are dysfunctional, really. We're speciesist, and we also carry a certain amount of this need to dominate and a sort of a violence, and unfortunately we're going to take that with us. So that's the other problem, which hasn't been addressed and which has to be addressed. I believe if before you going to any other planet, you have to address, one, our speciesism towards other animals, and stop eating, wearing and using them as resources and thinking of them as resources. We have to change our attitude toward our other people in our own species, and stop seeing anybody who is different, and that means whether they're a different sexual orientation, a different gender, if they're gender diverse, if they're a different race, etc. Any of that, we have to stop viewing them as other and stop viewing them as something that needs to be stamped out or dominated or used as resources or whatever the hell. I mean, we have to, this whole ignorance is all faces of the same ignorance, and we have to, for us to have any sort of success and peace in the galaxy, no matter what planet we go to, we have to address these issues, don't we, Dede?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we obviously we haven't. In fact, we're going the other way as we realize, as everybody on a deep level realizes, probably it's all over for us as a species and for other species, because we're going to take them all with us. Everybody's starting to go even more in the direction of let's turn on one another, and let's also try and take the resources of other people. I mean, instead of being cooperative, it's actually going the other way, and that's not surprising because we're panicking on a psychic level, and and sadly, and of course, all these terrible discriminations we all carry within us, and it's all being expressed now as we realize that it's coming to an end. So this is the very, very sad fact, which we're unfortunately going to take with us to any other planet, and which will end up being the destruction of that planet too. It's guaranteed if we take those unfortunate attitudes with us, which we will. It's going to express itself on whatever planet we go to, and eventually we're going to end up knocking ourselves off and everything else as well. So that's the sad fact. I'm not trying to be pessimistic. I'm just trying to be realistic. I mean, that's it. Really, in a way, isn't it? Psychologically and everything. If we haven't addressed those issues.
Yeah. Yeah, basically, I mean, Trish and I have talked about this in relation to a few different sorts of things. I mean, as far as this project goes, well, I really would be chuffed if it worked. I really think that the project to put a colony on Mars sounds fabulous as an idea. I don't think that it's going to happen in a few years. I think that it would take over a century, and it would take huge inputs.
It's too late, isn't it, in a way, to be doing that?
Late.
Yes.
And I think, like, if you were really going to plan on doing this well, you'd have to do things like try and find the crew for this 40 people and put them in the Australian desert in an enclosed situation where they couldn't see anything for a year. And see how they went.
Yeah.
And you'd start to see who can get on with each other and who can't.
Yeah.
If nothing else.
Yeah.
And if you have a real crisis, you can pull them out.
Yeah.
And the problem, of course, psychologically for anything long term, if we're talking about colonies, and Trish and I have talked about that.
Can I just interrupt before you go to that?
Yeah.
The thing is, though, that even in that particular situation where you're saying put them in the middle of in the middle of the desert, they still know if they became completely freaked out that they could say to the people on the outside, I need to get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
So psychologically, they know, even though it might be an experiment to see how they go, they still know that if push comes, if they completely freaked out, that they could get out of there. And that's the difference between knowing that and knowing, like, if you're in a situation like in a spaceship and you can't get out for 9 months, not knowing that you cannot get out. That's a completely different psychological space, isn't it?
Yeah. Well,
Sorry.
yeah, sure. I mean, one of the things of being in a spaceship is that if anybody has any kind of tendency or whatever to any kind of mental disorder or vulnerability or fragility, I mean, people can become depressed, people can become anxious, people can become paranoid, people can get so upset that they attack somebody else. People can self-harm. People can decide to do something like do a little sabotage on the ship, which could be fatal for everybody.
Really? They could get into sabotage. What?
Well, yeah, they could get really so
plot.
upset and losing the plot that they decide to, just go and release some air or something like that, and just say, or do something, turn off a valve.
You know what occurred to
whatever.
me? I mean, really, the real thing that should have happened, and of course, it's not possible technologically to do this, but they really basically, if we were much further advanced and they had artificial intelligence, that they could have put a bunch of artificially intelligent beings on the spaceship, they wouldn't have to have any psychological, traumas of being in an enclosed space, and then send them there and then set everything up. But unfortunately, we're nowhere.
Colonies of robots.
No, I'm not saying that doesn't pose its own set of problems. But what I'm saying is, if they I'm just saying that, have them set it up, not that then make them colonies of robots, but that would have been probably preferable to sticking people in a spaceship. The artificial intelligence thing is a whole other excuse
a spaceship.
Excuse the term can of worms. A whole other problem, of course, and we won't get into that. But anyway,
sticking them in a spaceship and then hoping that once they get there, then they'll be able to all work together fabulously.
Sorry.
What are you doing?
There we go.
Okay.
Go on.
Sticking them in a spaceship and then hoping that when they get there, they'll all be able to work together for another 2 years happily and build everything they need to survive. I mean, you look at how people can get upset and pick up their phone and throw it at a wall.
Yeah.
Well, on Earth, you can fix the phone.
Yeah.
If you get upset and throw something at your control panel or something like that for something, you're buggered.
Yes.
And that's what I'm talking about. It doesn't even have to be like sabotage. It just be something being upset and damaging something.
Yeah.
And Trish and I have talked about the possibility of generation ships and things like that, where you're trying to get to another star or another possibly Earth-like planet.
Dede, before we get to that, every movie always has some artificial intelligence losing their plot and killing everybody.
Deciding human beings are really, because they're intelligent, they decide human beings are really problematic. Let's get rid of them. And anyway. if you're talking about a generation ship to get to some other habitable planet, it's not Star Trek. You're talking about 1,000 years. Putting a bunch of people on who are going to have to try and survive for 1,000 years, which of course means having babies. But I mean, the idea that we've even talked about it in relation.
And we can't stop having babies here either, can we?
No.
We keep breeding and breeding, even though we're like 8 times more than what we should be on the planet. We're kind of like crazily breeding, even though we're completely overpopulated. The same thing's going to happen on Mars. People just can't. I mean, it's just we're animals and we just want to breed all the time. It's very sad. Anyway, go on.
Well, like the cockroaches took over and became the dominant thing in one species of ant in the biosphere, and everything else died. Well, that's what we're doing. We're the cockroaches of the planet. We're taking over every other.
Not that we have a problem with cockroaches. We're very fond of cockroaches.
No, we like cockroaches. We save them.
And they're very, very important to the planet as well. But they're important to themselves, but they're important to the planet.
But whenever you have a massive imbalance and only one species becomes dominant and takes over all the environments, it often destroys the environment. And that's what we're seeing with people.
Yes.
But we were talking about, what are the rich people think they're doing, continuing to destroy things in the name of money. Well, maybe they're planning on having their bunkers where they'll be able to let everybody else die and survive for a few hundred years or something until it's better. And the obvious thing is, well, how are their kids going to feel about that?
Apart from the fact that you can't live in a bunker, you won't be able to live in a bunker for 1,000 years anyway.
Well, you won't. I mean,
no.
and
so if they think
whoever they think is going to be guarding them is going to work out very quickly that just because they had a lot of money before, well, we're the ones with the guns.
Exactly.
We'll have a takeover.
Exactly. They're living in a fantasy if they think that they can. They're going to wait us all out to die. The plebs of the world, the 99%, and they're going to go into their little bunkers and live there and wait it all out until
mountains.
Until it's all back to. It's going to take millions of years to get back to any sort of.
Or even back to something habitable.
I think it's amazing how stupid we are. That they think that they can wait it out. These oligarchs.
We've all seen too many movies.
Too many American movies where Bruce Willis, lands on an asteroid and blows things up or whatever the hell.
Yeah.
They're ridiculous. It's an American exceptionalist idea of all these movies where a plucky group, a small group, end up saving the planet.
Small group of
give me a break.
Spunky people in a little town.
Yes, spunky people.
Defeat the aliens or defeat
these brilliant scientists,
the zombies
these brilliant scientists that are all of like 20 years old that just pop on a pair of glasses and stereotypically beautiful people who are going to save the planet.
Spunky girl Mockingjay who with her bow and arrow.
Really. Anyway,
the whole fascist nation.
Anyhow, so we probably should be wrapping it up soon. So what do you?
Anyway, I just wanted to say one of the things they never consider is the children.
Yes.
What are these children going to? Are these children going to want to do this? And when you're talking about long term, what happens when people start getting tired and having breakdowns and wanting to retire? And people are people.
Yeah.
And your children aren't necessarily going to want to become the next agricultural engineer and devote their lives to survival of the colony. These fantasies of we'll have a generation of Stakhanovites and they will keep wanting to just
people are barely able to keep their face out of a device these days, let alone do that, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean really it's not realistic.
No.
If we had a couple of hundred years and a real consensus on the planet that this is a good idea, I think we could maybe do that.
Yeah, we've run out of time, sadly.
But we're not going to.
No,
we don't have that.
No, we don't have the luxury of time, and that's the problem. If we had the luxury of time, we'd be able to, probably. And also, if we had a revolution of the heart and mind, like we just said before, which we're way behind there. That's what we'd need to actually make this really successful. Because ultimately, wherever you go, there you are. You take your mind and your attitudes with you, and that's what we would take with us. And sadly, it would just be a replication of the dysfunction that we now have on Earth, where there's perpetual normalized war against people of other races, etc. And we have continued animal exploitation and killing 1 trillion land and aquatic animals every year for trivial reasons and mostly palate pleasure, and we don't need to do that. There's a whole bunch of terrible things that we're doing right now, and we'd take it all with us. Yeah. Anyway, so what do you want to say
just as a closing thing? I mean, we don't have consensus that we want to survive on this planet.
Yes.
We know every scientist is saying, we're at crisis point, or we've passed crisis point. We've passed the tipping point. We're stuffed.
Runaway global warming.
We're on runaway global warming. Runaway all kinds of feedback effects in the ecology are likely to wipe out the human race soon.
Yes.
And what is the response? Well, in Australia and America and other places.
Continued unfettered capitalism.
Well, not just that. I mean, it's like, let's shut down all of these scientific people.
Yeah.
Let's pretend that nothing is happening.
Yeah.
Let's have a tiny minority of people, at the top, and we will rape and pillage and destroy everything so that we can pile up a bunch more noughts and zeros in some electronic bank account because we're not on a gold standard. It's not even a pile of gold anymore.
No.
It's frigging numbers in the economic system.
Yeah.
And they're happy to sacrifice the well-being of everybody and everything and all of the animals and the planet. They're happy to sacrifice life on Earth, for human beings.
Yeah, so
and
that's...
the planet will survive.
Yes.
The planet will survive without us.
Yes. And
hopefully we knock all of the people off so we don't recreate this.
And we don't say that in a misanthropist way. We're just saying it in that, there are other species on the planet who want to live and it's their home as much as it is ours. In fact, there's 99.99% of the planet's population is non-human animals, and they have a right to be here as much as we do. And so, when I sometimes say, we're a dysfunctional species and it's probably better if we go, I mean, we're actually going the other way in our attitudes, which is very destructive. And there are other animals that are morally equal to us, who deserve to live in peace and harmony, and not have our exploitation and our torturing and killing of them and our enslavement and breeding of them. So this is the thing that we need to, that's when we say things like it might be better that our species end. That's what I mean, and that's what Dede means. It's not a misanthropist thing. It's more that we're a failed evolutionary experiment. Yeah. Anyway, so we probably should wrap it up. So is there anything that you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I agree with Trish entirely on that. I mean, wouldn't it be lovely if we all developed some ability to think of others and to think of our own species, think of other species, think of the well-being of the planet which sustains us.
Yeah.
But we're not doing that.
No.
We're going the other way.
Yeah.
And as things get more desperate, the chances of our doing anything good become smaller.
Yeah. Hey, bring
it'd
Juicy.
Be lovely.
Bring
it'd be
Juicy
lovely
up
to have a
Up.
revolution. And
here's our little Juicy, our feline friend Juicy.
Hello, you.
Hey.
Hi, miss.
Hi. Hi, Juicy.
See my baby.
Hey. Hi.
Yeah.
Hi. Hello. Anyway, they're our feline friends whom we rescued.
We do.
Anyway, so we also want to say, I think it's sort of gone into a magnification here. I wanted to say, and for those of you who are not vegan, please consider going vegan. It'll be one of the best decisions you make in your life, and please go vegan, because it actually has a tremendous impact on the environment in a good way. 51% of greenhouse gases are from animal agriculture, and also, but the most important reason to go vegan is because non-human animals are not our resources. They're individuals who deserve the right not to be used as a resource, not to be used as a thing. They're moral persons. That means they're not a thing. They belong to the moral community, whether we realize it or not, because we've had a species indoctrination. They are moral persons who deserve not to be used as a resource. So please go vegan, and if you check out my resource, howtogovegan.org, that's howtogovegan.org, to find out more, that would be great. And that would be a first step to a nonviolent life, and it will change our attitude in many ways to not only other animals, of course, but to other human animals. And that's what we were talking about in this discussion, that until we change and have a revolution, evolution of our inner world and our thinking, until that happens, we're going to take that dysfunction everywhere. So, and it starts with becoming vegan. That's one of the most important things. So now we'll say goodbye. So say bye, Dede.
Okay,
bye. Bye, and thanks so much
Peace
for watching.
out.
I hope this wasn't too long, and I hope it was interesting. So my name's Trish Roberts. This is Dede River. Till next time, this is Faint Signals from Vega. Till next. Oh, and by the way, you can check out the website that I've made now, which is faintsignalsfromvega.com. Okay, thanks very much for watching. Till next time. Bye for now.